Well, welcome to the Books and Music Review Show. Today we're going to talk about guitars. And my name is Alan Cohen, and I've got my son Charles Cohen and my grandson Daniel Cohen. I'm going to talk about the guitars when they were called acoustic guitars. And from that point, I'll turn it over to Dan and Charlie, and they'll talk about electric guitars. Now, I own a Martin D18. Show it. Martin D18 is what they call a dreadnought. It's a large guitar, and it's used mostly for bluegrass and other forms of country music, folk music. It's got steel strings, and the neck is fairly narrow as compared to a classical guitar, which has a wide neck and nylon strings. I'm not going to talk about them too much. Concentrate on the country and bluegrass style of guitars, such as my D18. It was made, this particular one was made in 1963. I bought it brand new back then for the princely sum of $215, including a hard shell case. It was made in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, the home of the Martin Guitar Company. And I recently took a tour of the Martin Guitar Factory. And anyone who's out there watching who's interested in guitars should take this tour. And if you contact Martin, they're in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. You can Google them and find them easily. You should take that tour. They show how the guitars are made. They show the wood, the different kinds of wood that they use. And of course, a lot of it, although it's still handmade, a lot of it is done by robots. We're hearing a lot about robots these days manufacturing stuff. But it's true, the robots do a really nice job. Of course, besides Martin, the other famous name in acoustic guitars was Gibson. And you'll hear a little bit more about Gibson later because they also do electric guitars, and when we get to the electric guitar part of the show, they'll be talking about it. Other manufacturers besides Martin and Gibson were Epiphone, Guild, Gretsch, and of course, nowadays, we have Chinese guitars that are copies of these American guitars. There's one called Blue Ridge, and there's a company called Eastman, and they're actually pretty good. I was told that when they first started bringing Chinese guitars in, they weren't that good. But since they've been doing this now for at least 10 or 15 years, and they have the same craftsmen doing it, by now they've gotten good at their job. Although I don't think they use robots. I think they're still using real skilled workers. They are skilled these days. There's lots of ways of playing a guitar. And a lot of people use a flat pick, which, strangely enough, I didn't bring one along to show. And you just flat pick it. Otherwise, use a thumb pick, which fits on the thumb. And people do finger picking, where they actually use their fingers. Besides bluegrass and country music, this type of guitar is used in some older forms of blues, some forms of jazz. Singer-songwriters tend to use it. If you listen to people like John Prine, and of course going back to the beginning of that genre, Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, people back then, they used this type of guitar, and they played usually with a flat pick. The guitar that I've got, this D18, is finished in lacquer. And it's lots and lots of coats of lacquer. After it's all sanded and smooth, they spray it with a coat of lacquer, and then it's sanded again, and then another coat and another coat, one after the other. And of course, that's a very expensive procedure. Martin does make guitars with a flat finish for a lot less money. Doesn't look quite as nice, it sounds just as good. And the flat finish is just one coat of this sprayed chemical of some sort that they put on it. It's not glossy. It's much easier to put on, and needless to say, much cheaper. But it satisfies a market, and that's what it's all about. Now, besides this guitar, this type of guitar that was invented many, many years ago in the 1800s, C.F. Martin Company, Christian Frederick Martin was the originator back in 1840 or thereabouts. He came to New York from Germany, and he invented quite a few different styles of guitar. But after a while, we got into the 20s and 30s here, and it would seem that these guitars weren't really loud enough. It was okay for one person playing or a small combo, but when you got into a big band, you really couldn't hear them. So the next step was the BAMR brothers, a couple of brothers that came from Europe, and they opened a company which they named after themselves. They called it Dobro, the BAMR brothers. And what they made was a guitar that was completely acoustic, but it was amplified. Inside this cone, there's a conical resonator inside that takes the sounds of the strings and resonates it and pushes it out. Now, that's really pretty interesting that they came up with such an idea. What happened though, eventually, electric came along and guitars became electrified, and these things weren't really needed. But still, through the Depression, they sold quite a few of them. Believe it or not, they stayed in business during the Depression when people didn't have money for food, but they bought these things. Later on, they sold out, and Gibson is the company that owns the name, and they're still making these resonator guitars, and they're still calling them Dobros, even though it's made by Gibson. They're often played flat. If you can see on the TV, this has got a square neck, and the strings are raised way high up off the fingerboard. So you can't play it the old way like you play a regular guitar. You play it with a flat on your lap with a bar. You play it like that. And of course, what happened with these things, they became electrified too. And what happened? They came up with what they call a lap steel, which was basically just the neck and the strings and an electric pickup that would take the sound and put it through an amplifier. And that literally put these guitars out of business, except for certain niche musics. There are a lot of blues players that played these things and still do. And in bluegrass, we have quite a few bands that use the dobro guitar as a lead instrument. And of course, it was made the most famous by Flatt and Scruggs. Back in the 50s, Josh Graves was the epitome of dobro playing. And just to give you an idea what they look like, when some bluegrass star is playing, now there's a real star. Look at the cowboy hat, look at the suit, and how he holds the guitar. This is, in my opinion, what I would love to be if I were able to be a performer trying to make a living at this music, which I'm not. I do amateur music. I have a lot of fun with it. I play in some local bands playing bluegrass music. But at this point, let's find out what happened after the electrification came in to the guitar field. Charlie, you want to talk a little bit about electric guitars now?
Yes, so Daniel and I really like very loud rock music. But amazingly enough, it wasn't really loud rock music musicians who were the first ones clamoring for louder guitars. In fact, in 1948, country star Merle Travis tried to have an electric guitar made, and he went to a man named Bigsby who made him a solid body electric guitar. And Dan, a solid body electric guitar is different from the type of guitar that my dad, your grandfather, just showed. How does it get the sound from this solid body out to maybe 60,000 people in in an arena?
Well, that's very simple. Can you mind grabbing that? So yeah, how they get the sound out without making it hollow or have F holes? Well, it's simple. Kind of like similar to the dobro, except the resonance doesn't come from inside the car, but instead, what happens with an electric guitar is that you have little electromagnetic magnets called pickups, which are usually wound and wired. The most well-known wire material used in those wires are copper. Traditional pickups most pickups are wired, though a company called Fishman recently came out with pickups that are not wired and set circuit boards, but that's another story for another day. Basically, what happens is you strum the strings, and then these pickups, they pick up the vibration of the strings. The magnets in here pick up the vibrations of the strings, and it converts that vibration into a little electrical impulse that goes through a cable that plugs into the guitar, and then it plugs into a device called an amp, which as the name says, amplifies that sound. Basically, once it gets into the amplifier, it's converted into a sound that is amplified and pushed out for the world to hear.
Right, because if you just played this,
yeah,
that's not very loud, is it, Dan?
Yeah, and we didn't bring an amp here to show you how loud it can get, but that's okay, because even the most average Joe probably knows what an electric guitar is and what it does on a basic level.
So Dan, in 1950, I understand a guitar was invented that was really important. I think you wanted to talk about it.
Yes, there was one man, a very important man back in the 1950s. His name, it's a last name that I never hear of anyone else having. His name was Leo Fender, and he founded a guitar manufacturer called Fender.
I wonder where he got that name.
Yeah, me too. To this day, I still can't figure out where he got it from. He created and patented a design for a guitar that changed the world. It was originally called the Broadcaster. However, Gretsch stepped in and said, "Nope, sorry, we already owned a product under that name." And Leo Fender chose the peaceful route and decided to be the bigger man and said, "All right, I'll change it to something else." And then the name he changed it to would later would become a very iconic, famous guitar that changed the world as we know it. It's called the Fender Telecaster. And
Where did you get the name Telecaster, Dan?
Well, it's simple. In the 1950s, television was starting to become a mainstay and was considered the future. It was considered the equivalent of the internet in today's world.
Interesting.
And he basically combined the words broadcaster, taking the caster from broadcaster, and from television, he just took the tele out of television and stuck it here and became known as the Telecaster. And this color on this book, it's called Butterscotch Blonde, and this color is the iconic color that's often associated with Telecasters. But they also came in these colors. This pink Telecaster is pink paisley, and this guitar was used by a guitar player named James Burton, who played guitar for and on all the songs that he played guitar for Elvis Presley.
And 2 years later, Dan, in 1952, I think another very important guitar came out. Why don't you tell us about that one?
Yes, and this guitar was created and with a man who collaborated with Gibson to design this car. Guitar. Sorry, guitars. They go together, but it's not about cars right now. Anyway, even though Fender uses a lot of colors from automobiles in the 1950s. Sorry. This man, his name is Lester Paul. He's more famously known by his nickname Les Paul. And he collaborated with Gibson to design a guitar that was very round and circular. It's kind of, it looks similar. It looks similar to this one, though the top of this body kind of is more Telecaster looking, but the general roundness, like the Les Paul, it was a single cutaway type guitar, which is what this is. Single cutaway refers to like just one side is like cut it into, and he collaborated with Gibson to design a guitar that looked similar to this, and he designed it so that he could play while resting his arm on it. And
he had broken his arm, and the doctor said that they wouldn't be able to give him a good range of movement. And he said, when you set it so that I can play my guitar. And he had this way the rest of his life, but he was able to keep playing his guitar.
There you go. And that's why it was so big. The rounded bottom was so big, and the guitar became known as the Les Paul. I mean, yeah, you all wonder where that name came from, and
So then, Dan, 2 years later, Mr. Fender, who saw a lot of business going over to the Les Paul, he came out with another kind of guitar. What kind of guitar was that?
Oh, yep. So, but basically Leo Fender then came out with another guitar not too long after the Telecaster he designed it based on the success on the Telecaster and the feedback he got from customers who bought the Telecaster, and used the customer feedback to make improvements to the guitar, and which he used that feedback to design the guitar to make it more comfortable to hold and play. So like the neck was nice and curved, and the bottom part of the body was like curved a little bit inwards. That way it rests against your stomach comfortably, whether you're sitting down or standing up. And I know we have
I got your picture.
yeah, we have a picture of some we have in the book. Here we go. It was called he called it the Stratocaster, which is one of the most iconic guitars in the world. It was.
Hold it down.
Oh, hold it down. Okay. Anyway,
Good picture.
it was a vast improvement on the Telecaster and was really successful. Just like the Telecaster, this guitar, just like the Les Paul and the Telecaster, the Stratocaster, just like those two other guitars, they were so successful and popular that they're still in production to this day.
Well, Dan, we like some more modern kind of music. And
Yeah.
there's different shapes of guitars.
Yeah.
But amazingly to me, one that I really like kind of looks like a V shape.
Oh, yes.
And we have a picture of that one too.
Yeah. This one,
Which is here.
this V shape right here. This one, it's right here. Gibson created this guitar, and at around the same time, they unveiled the Explorer and two other guitars at once at a NAMM show. They were designed to look futuristic and stuff. This specific one is called the Gibson Flying V. And they also around that time they also unveiled the Explorer.
So the Flying V to me, Dan, looks very, very modern. But do you know what year that came out?
That came out in 1958.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and so did the Explorer and two other guitars that were just prototype concepts called the Futura and Moderne, but those never made it into a final production model. But here's the interesting thing about the Flying V and Explorer. When they were first introduced in the 1950s, they didn't really catch on, so Gibson pulled them out of production. But then, when the 1960s came, Gibson decided to try again, because in the 1960s, the concept of futuristic and science fiction and stuff was starting to become a mainstream, popular in the mainstream. With your futuristic 60s stuff like James Bond and Star Trek and this show that most people, even in the 1960s, probably don't remember, called UFO, and also we also put a man on the moon. So Gibson decided, why not try and see if they can capitalize on that futuristic thinking that was around the 1960s, and so they put the Explorer and the Flying V back to production, and it caught on.
There's one other one from the 1960s I know you wanted to talk about, because there was a very popular band called the Beatles that launched the British invasion over here in America. And what kind of guitar were they most famous for?
They didn't use this guitar throughout their entire career, but during the era of the British invasion, when they were still in the era where they still wore the tailored suits and the short mop top haircuts, they used a guitars made by a manufacturer called Rickenbacker, those specific guitars that the Beatles used were part of a series called the 300 series, which is that, and those guitars are the ones that create that little jangle chimey thing where like dun 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 dun. Sorry, that's a Kinks riff, but it's similar. Anyway, wait.
Still the 60s.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, we also like music today that's very, very powerful. And many of the guitar players that we like, and some that you'll talk about, do a lot of very fast playing, and they use their hands a lot. And they were finding the guitars of the 60s didn't always meet their needs. So what came around in the 1980s to help meet their needs?
What came around in the 1980s? That's a good question, we are going to show you.
Put me under a lot of pressure, Dan. I don't know what page it is, because you didn't tell me you were going to show this particular one.
I figured it might have been easier to show. Yeah. Don't worry, we're almost there. My apologies. We're only human. Here we go.
There we go.
Basically, what became, I considered, and just like my dad, I consider these the holy grail of guitars. These are called Super Strats. No, I mean, there isn't one company that patented the name Super Strat. It's just a name given to guitars that have a Stratocaster shaped body, but have upgrade features like humbuckers, which is what that red guitar down there has, more comfortable necks, and some of them had little rods that you could use to make cool sounds called a whammy bar or a tremolo or vibrato. There's different terms for that thing. The one prominent person in the field of whammy bars and tremolos was a guy by the name of Floyd Rose. He liked doing a lot of those little like those stuff that people with whammy bars often do, like those dives and all that stuff.
So but there's a number of different kind of guitar players, and we thought maybe you would tell us a few, maybe one for each decade, and tell us a little about what they did differently to kind of push the envelope for guitar playing. And the first one we were going to pick was from the 1960s, and I know that you have somebody that you think is pretty important as a forerunner of the type of music that we really like, and who would that be?
Oh, well, it's none other than the greatest guitarist in the 1960s. His name is oh, sorry, I didn't mean to bring David Bowie's Rubber Band. His name is Jimi Hendrix. He is a very amazing guitarist who he was very unique. For one thing, he was a left-handed guitar player, and back in the 60s, the thought of a left-handed guitar wasn't a twinkle in any of those manufacturers' eyes yet. That didn't start coming to play until the early 70s, like not too long after he died. But what he did to make it easier to play, since he was left-handed, was he took a Stratocaster. The guitar he used throughout most of his career was a Stratocaster. He also used a Flying V at one point, but I don't remember when he used it. He basically took the strings off of the Stratocaster. Let's bring this guitar back in. So
Dan, this is how a right-handed player would play. And you use your left hand to hold the strings and your right hands to strum it. He had to turn it upside down. But what happens when we turn it upside down?
Well, what happens is when you turn it upside down, instead of the high E string being up here, instead of the low E string being up here, the high E string is up here, and the low E string is down here. And that
would be upside down in the wrong way.
Yeah. So what he did was he took the strings off the guitar and reversed the orders, so that's by taking the strings off and then putting it so that it'll have the right order. Okay, we're
And why don't you
starting.
tell us a little bit about his style and
We got
the
5 minutes.
tone and sound?
It says we got 5 minutes left.
5 minutes.
Yeah, don't worry.
Tell us a little bit about the tone and sound there, Dan, and then
All
we'll
right.
go into some other people.
Okay, so his sound and tone is often a little bit of a mystery because he never really brought to light like exactly what specifically was the secret behind his sound. But what we do know is that his sound is a very crunchy, overdriven type sound, and he would often use the feedback, not the kind of feedback that was used by Leo Fender to help create an improved guitar, but feedback. But this is a feedback in a different context. This is referring to a scientific type feedback, which is basically you strum the guitar, the electric guitar, and you bring the guitar up to the amp, making sure the pickups are facing the amp, and then the closer you get to the amp, the more feedback you get. It sounds like kind of like a. It's basically like sustained type note. It's basically like a precursor to a sustainer like an EBow or a sustainer pickup.
So, Dan, I'll take the one for the 1970s. We picked Jimmy Page, even though he had started in the 1960s, but he's most well known for his work in Led Zeppelin. And he's also mostly well known for playing a Les Paul Gibson-style guitar. But amazingly, and Dan knew this, for the guitar solo in their most famous song, Stairway to Heaven, he actually used a Fender Telecaster.
I
And
actually
we just
never
thought
knew
that was pretty amazing.
Actually, wait, I did.
But live, in order to play the different types of guitar, he used a double neck guitar that had 12 strings on the top and 6 strings on the bottom, and he played both when he was
Here, bring me
live.
that guitar again.
Now, we're not going to have time to do that because you wanted to talk in the 1980s about a particular guitar player that you're very fond of.
Double neck just refers to like if there was 2 of those long things called a neck. If there's 2 of them. Anyway, now let's get on to 1980s where I'm going to tell you my favorite, and this guy's my favorite guitar player of all time. I think he's like a godsend when it comes to guitar. His name is George Lynch. He's most famous for being the guitarist for Dokken back in the 1980s, which is my favorite band of all time. He's a high speed, high energy player who and you're gonna like this fact, Grandpa. His style of playing. He incorporates a lot of his style of playing. Like he's got quite blues influence. Like a lot of his playing is influenced from blues. You can hear a little bit of the blues influence when you listen to Dokken. When you listen to any song by Dokken, you can hear a little bit more of it when you listen to the albums by Lynch Mob. Especially the most recent Lynch Mob album, you can definitely hear. But especially in George Lynch's more recent work, you can definitely hear the blues influence in there. And in an interview, he said most of his guitar work is somewhat based on the blues scale.
And he's an interesting person because not only does he play the guitar, he makes his own.
Yeah, he does still has an endorsement at ESP, which he's been endorsed ever since he joined Dokken. He also makes his own guitars because he has his own guitar company now called Mr. Scary Guitars, which is really cool.
And in the last minute or so that we have, I think you wanted to talk a little bit about somebody from the 1990s who's a very interesting guitar player.
Yeah, his name is Tom Morello. He's most known for being a guitar player in Rage Against the Machine and Audio Slave, and currently he plays in a group called Prophets of Rage. He's a very, very politically driven guitar player, and so it made sense that he joined that he was a member of Rage Against the Machine because that was a very politically driven band. I'm not going to get into what their political views are because this isn't about politics, but
And he's created all sorts of different effects. It makes the guitar sound in just amazing different things. It doesn't sound like a guitar.
Yeah.
And with that, Dan, I think Grandpa's going to take us home.
Yes.
Well, what we're trying to do here is give you just a little idea about what guitars can do, what kind of music they can make, and to give you some inspiration. For the viewers out in TV land, go out and buy a guitar if you don't already own one. Learn to play it. Have some fun. Have the